T plus
Booster
40
and ship,
seconds.
avionics
It's
power,
one
telemetry
hell of a
nominal.
sight from here. We see it arcing right over top of us. We see 33 out of 33 Raptor engines lit on Super Heavy as it starts to ascend skyward. Coming up on maximum aerodynamic pressure, then only about a minute and a half until we get into hot staging.
Wow, Dan, that was incredible. We could feel the building shaking here, feel the vehicle's power. Now we're just about a minute away from shutting down those engines on the booster. Again, this booster is flying for its second time today.
All right, so hot staging coming up a little under a minute. We're going to see all but the 3 center engines turn off on the booster. So our version of MECO, most engines cut off. And then just a few seconds later, hoping to see 6 engines ignite on ship to push it away. All right, hot staging, about 30 seconds. And definitely keep an eye on which way the booster flips. First ever directional flip we're going for today. Should flip straight up. See those engines powering down?
Booster engine cutoff. Ship ignition. Stage separation.
Incredible flip by Super Heavy booster, and you can see those 6 engines, those 3 engines on the ship ignited.
6 healthy Raptors running on ship, on its way to space. Peek that engine view. Booster doing the boost back. Chris, how's it looking over there in Hawthorne, man?
It is looking...
Chamber pressure is nominal.
It is looking absolutely incredible here in Hawthorne. As we said, 6 healthy engines on ship. We've got 13 out of 13 engines on the booster. Now down to those 3, which is what we expect in the final moments of the boost back burn. Now, as a reminder, we are not recovering the Super Heavy booster today. We are instead going to do some...
Boost back, shut down.
And there we had a good shutdown of the boost back burn. Next up will be the jettison of that hot stage
Ship
ring.
avionics power and telemetry nominal.
Great call out there that everything looking nominal aboard the Super Heavy vehicle, which is returning to Earth, and we're going to be doing some experiments with it, including a higher angle of attack re-entry, as well as some engine tests as it gets closer to the Gulf. We are, again, because of these tests not recovering it, we are sending it to the Gulf on purpose to do those tests. But again, you see the booster on the left-hand side of your screen. You see ship with 6 healthy engines continuing its ascent to its planned suborbital trajectory. Everything going very well so far for Starship's 9th flight. Now 4 minutes, 15 seconds in. Great views from inside of the aft engine area of ship there, looking at those 3 sea level and 3 Raptor engines on the right-hand side of your screen. The booster doing its LOX dump, that liquid oxygen dump. So because we don't need some of that liquid oxygen propellant in its tanks, we vent that propellant out to lessen the booster's mass as it comes in for its landing. Just absolutely gorgeous views watching these 2 vehicles do their respective things in the skies over Texas here today. And Dan, we're approaching the 5-minute mark into the flight. Super Heavy is descending rapidly. What can we expect here in the next few minutes as it does its atmospheric tests?
Yeah, now as we had talked about, Super Heavy might not have a very smooth ride down. We're going to be putting it through this higher angle of attack. So we're kind of pitching it up a tiny bit, increasing drag. We've done this in wind tunnels. We've done this in computer modeling. It shows that sometimes the control isn't great, but only one way to really prove it out, and that's to get real-world data. So here comes Super Heavy. It should be igniting for its landing burn in just about 40 seconds from now.
And we are going to relight 13 engines, then bring that down to 3 engines. As we talked about earlier, we will be intentionally
Booster
shutting
FPS
down.
is saved.
We will be shutting down one of those 3 center engines intentionally to push the limits of the Super Heavy booster.
Ship Raptor, chamber pressure is nominal.
And continuing to see 6 healthy engines on the ship, 3 sea level and 3 vacuum engines still ignited as the Super Heavy booster is making its way back down to Earth.
We can see those grid fins doing some heavy work.
Booster landing startup.
Ignited for our landing burn. It may have ended with that landing burn. Does look like we lost telemetry from the booster once we started into that landing burn. Did you hear confirmation that the booster did demise? So the booster's flight ending before it was able to get through landing burn, but again, we are not bringing that back. We were expecting it to make a hard splashdown in the Gulf. We were getting live data back the entire time through that high angle of attack flight, so that was something that was really vital for us to get during this reuse. First free flight of booster in the books. All right, ship has about 2 minutes left.
In about 2 minutes, we expect all 6 Raptor engines to shut down. That will be SECO, basically second engine or second stage engine shut off. And these are some incredible views, Dan, from the aft end of the ship, watching as the engines stay ignited with the Earth in the background.
As always, the Starship avionics team, the techs. I think we just heard the booster. But all right, we got about a minute left into this burn. All eyes definitely on ship as we get through the final stages into its ascent. We're expecting it to start to cut those engines off in about 45 seconds.
Terminal guidance.
All right, just about 30 seconds to go. We're in terminal guidance in the final stages of this ascent burn. We did see shutdown of the Raptor engines. We do stagger these, so we do the Raptors first. Those 3 have shut down successfully. Sea level's still running.
Ship engine cut off.
Ship engine
Nominal
cut off,
insertion.
the 3 most beautiful words in the English language.
And great call out that we had nominal insertion. An incredible flight test so far today. We reflew a Super Heavy booster for the very first time in 9 test flights. Ship is in its orbital trajectory. Again, it's going to remain suborbital for its mission today. But it ignited
Ship FPS is saved.
It ignited all 6 of its engines and made it all the way through SECO just now.
What a moment.
Incredible.
All right, but I mean, that's still lots to come for the rest of this flight. Per usual, I need to collect myself. Hey, Chris, how's it going over there in Hawthorne, man? How's everybody doing?
I think the elation and the excitement and the happiness at what we just saw achieved carried through across all of our sites. What An incredible view to see Starship back orbiting the Earth just under 11 minutes into our mission. Absolutely exciting to see all of this, and super pumped especially to see all of the team's hard work in action here today. As guaranteed, it has been an exciting evening so far for Starship's 9th test flight. We lifted off a little bit after 6:30 p.m. after a couple of holds that were triggered at the T-minus 40-second mark, but we were able to clear those, one on the Raptor, one on the tower, and we were able to lift off successfully from Starbase. 33 out of 33 Raptor engines lit on the Super Heavy, all 6 engines lit on ship, bringing it to its planned suborbital trajectory around Earth. But as Dan said, we've got a lot still coming up in our flight sequence. So coming up at about T plus 18 minutes, 26 seconds, we'll have the first deployment of simulated Starlink satellites planned from Starship. That will be followed at about T plus 37 minutes and 49 seconds by the relight of a single Raptor sea level engine in space. This is going to help us gather data on our ability to do a deorbit burn for future Starship missions that will go orbital. And then, of course, one of the biggest tests yet to come is the new heat shield modifications to Starship. And that'll start with re-entry into Earth's atmosphere at about the T plus 45 minute mark, which should take about 18 minutes to complete. And now today's reentry is going to test that heat shield like we said, specifically how Starship will hold up to 100 missing heat shield tiles on its thermal protection system. Now, we purposely took those 100 tiles off over very critical areas of the vehicle to be able to safely test on a flight like this suborbital trajectory into the Indian Ocean what might happen on an operational flight in those areas if we were to lose the primary heat shield tile over Starship. So very critical test coming up. And then after that, we'll have the final descent where we will again be pushing Starship to its limits. We definitely pushed the booster to its limits today to gather data, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing on that ship, seeing how the ship handles various flight conditions that we will need it to fly in as we look to one day soon bring ships back to Starbase for catch and reuse. Now, while there are payload simulators on Starship for deployment today, as we will see in a few minutes, the primary data and the primary payload for today is the data. And today, just like with Starship's previous test flights, that data is coming to us courtesy of our Starlink network. In fact, it is from Starlink that you are seeing these wonderful views of ship in space right now. So, and I can't wait to see Starlink really provide those epic views and that data transmission during reentry, which is very, very critical to getting that data during reentry. So Dan and Jesse, it's been an exciting day so far. There's more to come as we get ready for Starship's first ever payload deploy. What can we expect next here in the next few minutes?
Thanks, Chris. Just going to reiterate, thank you to the Starlink team for these incredible views today. In a few minutes, Starship will deploy 8 Starlink simulators, similar in size to our next generation Starlink satellites. The Starlink simulators will be on the same suborbital trajectory as Starship, meaning they will passively re-enter the atmosphere, just like Starship. With tests like these, we can see how Starship's payload deploy systems work in flight while ensuring that the simulator satellites pose no safety risk to people on Earth or for other satellites in orbit. Now, this also ensures that any parts of these simulator Starlink satellites that do survive reentry splash down harmlessly in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
And then before we get there, though, we're going to have to open up that payload deploy door. So we've only ever done that one time before. Pretty sure it was Flight 3. Someone on the internet, please check me. But that was the only time we ever opened it. And we've had Starlink simulators on the last 2 flights, but we haven't gotten to this moment yet where we're able to open up the payload door and start deploying these. It's going to be pretty cool. We've got them stacked inside of the Starship payload bay, and we'll have potentially a couple of views. You saw one camera pop up. Oh, there we go. Look inside of the payload bay of Starship. You can see them stacked down in the middle of your view. There's kind of 4 on either side, so they're sandwiched on top of each other, a stack of 4 right behind each other. And then we're going to pop the door open. It's on the right side of your screen, so we'll see that open up and then start firing those Starlink simulators out into space.
We are expecting the payload door to open in a little over a minute from now. And then once that payload door is open, about a couple minutes later is when we will start dispensing those Starlink similars.
That's a
What a
view
great
right
view.
at the bottom of the stack. So should be able to see them kind of firing out from right there. So really cool. And eventually these are going to carry dozens of the next generation of Starlink satellite into space, and those are going to enable some truly insane things in terms of speeds from space and what we're able to do. Starlink's been really great for Starship, obviously. Getting live video back is really cool, but just the amount of high-speed telemetry, everything we're able to get back is insane. And for a development program, that's kind of everything. We're in excess of 130 or 160. My numbers are fuzzy right now, just like my brain is. But well in excess of 100 megabits per second of downlink. And a lot of that gets eaten up by video. We've got dozens of cameras across Starship. We added several more. For this flight, you saw a couple of those as we have essentially 360 degrees. Oop. Open the pod bay door, Hal.
Now we are expecting the payload door to open any moment now, so we're watching out for that. Again, you're looking at the inside of Starship as it's suborbital.
Well, we heard the door open was in progress. It was unable to actuate all the way open, so they are going to close it back up. Hal told me no. He said, I'm sorry, Dan. Can't do that. Looks like we won't get the door open today. But that's okay. This is obviously a test we want to be able to do before we're deploying full-on Starlinks. But the real focus for this, now that we are in space, is getting to that reentry. That is the most critical phase of Starship that we still have to prove out. All right, well, so it does look like we're not going to be able to deploy Starlinks today, but we should have pretty frequent views from Starship. They might cut in and out every once in a while, but should be pretty regular. We are in darkness right now, so might be a lot of black, but the cool part is when we get to reentry, it's going to be daytime.
Yes, and we did that on purpose so that we can get some live daytime views as ship is returning back to Earth.
All right, so we are going to take a break. Enjoy these views as we get them. Enjoy the tunes. We'll be back in a couple of minutes when we get ready to relight one of those Raptor engines on orbit. See you soon. All right, if you're just tuning in, we are about 30 minutes into today's flight test, and the ship is on its suborbital trajectory. As you can see in some of the views and from some of the telemetry, we are in a little bit of a spin. We did spring a leak in some of the fuel tank systems inside of Starship, which a lot of those are used for your attitude control. And so at this point, we've essentially lost our attitude control with Starship. We are still on a path toward re-entry. We are suborbital, so no matter what, we are going to enter. However, this lowers the chances for it to be a controlled re-entry. So if you think back to Flight 3, when we had something similar happen, just the end symptom of a loss of attitude control, we were in a roll by the time we hit re-entry. So we are going to re-enter. We should hopefully still have views. The Starlink satellites are pretty robust to still maintaining contact. We've got 4 of those terminals on the vehicle, and they're pretty robust to maintaining contact even when we are in a spin, essentially. So we should hopefully continue to keep live views. It's going to still be dark until we get a little bit closer to entry, as we are a little bit, we're coming up on Africa. I believe we do swing just to the south of that continent. And by the time we start heading out over the Indian Ocean, we'll start heading into a sunrise. So, not looking great with a lot of our on-orbit objectives for today, where we were hoping to do the PES deploy and relight an engine, and then really importantly, get into that controlled entry to really put the heat shield through the ringer. Nonetheless, Starship marching forward towards that re-entry over the Indian Ocean, so we'll continue to hang with it and give you any updates as things continue to change. All right, so 36 minutes, 15 seconds into today's flight tests. You're seeing some flat movement here on the ship. If you've been following along, we have essentially lost attitude control on the ship at this point. It is suborbital, so it's still headed to the exact same trajectory as before. We were not able to get that payload door open and deploy those nose cones. We've been dealing with some leaks on the ship. This is also what led to that loss of attitude control. So at this point, we are kind of in a spin, and we are also going to be skipping that Raptor relight. If you've followed through the history of Starship, something similar happened, different cause, but same symptom back on Flight 3, where we weren't able to maintain attitude control in orbit. And so we're going to skip the relight of that Raptor engine while we're in space. We are going to still proceed with entry, but as we are not able to control the attitude of the ship, as we get into entry, it will enter in whatever orientation it is in at the time, which does not bode well for the ship's heat shield, as we're not going to be essentially aligned the way that we want to do for reentry. So it is definitely coming down. It is definitely heading to the Indian Ocean, but our chances of making it all the way down are pretty slim. So we'll still get as much data as we can. We're still getting live telemetry, live views from Starlink the entire time, and we'll continue to stick with ship as it continues on. We are about 10 minutes away or so until we start getting into entry, and the light will start to pick up as we cross the Indian Ocean, and we'll start to see a little bit more daylight, and we'll, as always, as long as we maintain that comm link, get some plasma on the way in and start to bring the Starship back through the Earth's atmosphere. So that coming up in about 10 minutes or so. So we'll check back in with everybody in a little bit.
If
All
you-
right, so we are 42 minutes and change into today's flight test. You're seeing the light show start as Starship is getting closer to its reentry. If you're just tuning in, we were able to successfully make it to orbit, run into a couple of issues as we've coasted to our entry point over the Indian Ocean. At this point, we had lost attitude control of the ship and entered into a spin. The team made the call to do what's called passivate the vehicle, so we're essentially venting all of the remaining propellant overboard, and it's going to make an uncontrolled reentry. Important to note, this is a contingency that is planned for, and we clear the zones in the Indian Ocean where these entries could take place. So we're not going to come down exactly where we would have had nothing happened, but we do clear a tremendous amount of space out in the Indian Ocean in the event that we run into this. We understand that there are always risks, essentially, with these flight tests, with the hardware, but we don't really accept any compromise when it comes to protecting people.
And it is one thing to note is we will actually still re-enter in our planned airspace zone, which is good. That is exactly what we planned for. You know, we do plan for if something does go a little bit off nominal, that we have enough airspace cleared out for situations just like this.
Yeah, reentry is still just that really critical phase that we need to try and gather as much data, as much information as possible. Is a fully reusable heat shield has never been flown before, the history of space flight, and that's something that Starship still has to crack. And so we had a whole range of experiments on this one at this point, and we just started to lose some of our cameras, so it's very possible that we'll start to lose contact with Starship a lot sooner than we would have if it was a nominal reentry. So we are expecting it to break up essentially on its reentry over the Indian Ocean. So not able to do a lot of our on-orbit objectives today, but just the fact that we, got it into space was just a really big moment for a lot of the team.
Yeah, and another thing to note is that Super Heavy did fly for its second flight today. It first flew on Flight 7, and it made it all the way to our shutdown of all the engines and stage separation, getting ship into its suborbital trajectory today. It did ignite its 13 engines, but it did demise at that point. We did plan to fly it back down to Earth at a higher angle of attack, and we do expect it to stress the vehicle a lot more than what we've seen previously. So it's not unexpected that we did lose the booster before we got to the actual landing.
Yeah. So we're gonna continue to hang out and see if we get any updates on ship. It does look like we might be getting some video back soon. There we go. So this is a view essentially on the top part of Starship. You're looking up at the payload bay and towards the nose cone. So views are going to be a little bit scarce potentially, as again, we are in essentially a tumble. We had lost that attitude control. So Starlink, when it's able to connect, able to feed this down. We are at the phase where we would expect entry to start within the next minute or so. So we are entering uncontrolled, but again, we're entering into an airspace and a sea space that is cleared and monitored in advance of launch and before we get to this phase.
And with the views that we are able to see, you are seeing a lot of that plasma build up. During reentry, we do expect the vehicle to see about 1,400 degrees Celsius, and there you can see the flap feeling that temperature there.